Picture this: a packed congressional hearing room, cameras rolling, tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, is about to say something that will make veteran Senator Jeff Merkley's face turn red with embarrassment. But nobody in that room, not the reporters, not the other lawmakers, not even Crockett herself, knew they were witnessing the moment that would define the entire voting rights debate for years to come. Picture this: a packed congressional hearing room, cameras rolling, tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, is about to say something that will make veteran Senator Jeff Merkley's face turn red with embarrassment. But nobody in that room, not the reporters, not the other lawmakers, not even Crockett herself, knew they were witnessing the moment that would define the entire voting rights debate for years to come. What happened next? Hold that thought. Because to understand why this moment was so explosive, we need to go back to where it all began. 3 months before the crisis hit, Jasmine Crockett stood in the well of the House, her voice steady but urgent. She was warning about something that seemed impossible to most of her colleagues: a complete breakdown of voting access across multiple states, triggered by a domino effect that would start in Texas and spread like wildfire. "You're being alarmist," Jeff Merkley had told reporters outside the Capitol that day, dismissing Crockett's warnings with the kind of confidence that only comes from decades in Washington. "This system has safeguards. This kind of widespread disruption simply isn't possible in modern America." But here's what Merkley didn't know, and what Crockett had discovered through her network of grassroots organizers back home in Texas: the signs were all there. Voter registration databases mysteriously going offline, polling locations being moved at the last minute, mail-in ballot applications being rejected for microscopic signature differences. But while Merkley was focused on federal legislation and grand gestures, Crockett was watching the ground game, and what she saw terrified her. The first crack in Merkley's confidence came during a private Democratic caucus meeting in June 2023. Sources who were in the room tell a story that's never been reported until now, a story that shows just how wrong the Oregon senator really was. Crockett had requested 5 minutes to present new data from Texas. What she showed her colleagues was a sophisticated voter suppression operation, unlike anything they'd seen before. Not the obvious, heavy-handed tactics of the past, but something far more insidious and effective. "This isn't about obvious disenfranchisement," Crockett explained, clicking through slide after slide of data. "This is about creating just enough friction to discourage voting without creating obvious legal challenges." Merkley, sitting in the back row, shook his head. "These are isolated incidents," he insisted. "You're connecting dots that aren't there." But Crockett wasn't finished. She pulled up a map showing patterns across multiple states, patterns that would prove prophetic just months later. And what she said next sent a chill through the room. "Senator Merkley, with all due respect, you're thinking like it's still 2020. They've evolved, and if we don't adapt our response, we're going to get crushed." The room fell silent, because everyone could hear something in Crockett's voice that scared them: absolute certainty. It started exactly where Crockett said it would: Harris County, Texas. On a Tuesday morning in September 2023 that seemed like any other, the voter registration system crashed. Not just a glitch, look, a complete systematic failure that would leave hundreds of thousands of voters in limbo. At first, officials called it a technical problem. Merkley's office issued a statement calling for patience and expressing confidence that the issue would be resolved quickly. "These systems are resilient," his spokesperson said. "This is exactly the kind of temporary setback our democratic institutions are designed to handle." But Crockett was already on the phone with county officials, and what she was hearing contradicted everything Merkley was saying publicly. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was the beginning of something much larger and much more coordinated. Within 48 hours, similar technical problems were being reported in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin. Always in the most diverse, most Democratic-leaning counties. Always with the same pattern of system failures that seemed random but weren't. And suddenly, Crockett's warnings from March didn't seem so alarmist anymore. The call came at 2:47 a.m. Eastern Time on September 15, 2023. Merkley's chief of staff, woken from a dead sleep, found himself on the line with a county election official from Phoenix, who was practically in tears. "Senator, I need you to understand," the official said, her voice shaking. "This isn't random. We've been tracking the patterns, and it's exactly what that congresswoman from Texas predicted. Every single vulnerability she identified, they're being exploited simultaneously." The chief of staff, still groggy, asked the question that would haunt Merkley for months: Which congresswoman from Texas? Crockett. Jasmine Crockett. She called this months ago, down to the specific counties and the exact methods being used. By morning, Merkley's entire approach to the voting rights crisis had to change. Because the woman he'd dismissed as an alarmist rookie had been right about everything. While Merkley was focused on traditional legislative battles, Crockett had been building something different, a real-time intelligence network that connected voting rights advocates, county officials, cybersecurity experts, and community organizers across the conclave. Every night after votes in Congress, she would spend hours on Zoom calls with this network, tracking patterns that the traditional political establishment was missing. It wasn't glamorous work, spreadsheets, data analysis, technical briefs that would put most politicians to sleep. But it was this unglamorous work that gave her insights no one else had. Jasmine understood something that a lot of us older hands didn't, admits a senior Democratic strategist who worked closely with both Crockett and Merkley. She understood that the battleground had moved. While we were fighting the last war, she was preparing for the next one. The network Crockett built included county election officials in swing districts across 12 states, cybersecurity researchers tracking voting system vulnerabilities, community organizers documenting on-the-ground suppression tactics, data scientists analyzing voting patterns in real time. This wasn't just political organizing, it was intelligence gathering at a level that impressed even veteran operatives. Jeff Merkley's error wasn't incompetence, it was overconfidence born from experience. As a senator who had been fighting voting rights battles for over a decade, he thought he understood the playbook. He expected the same tactics that had been used in previous cycles: DUS voter roll purges, polling place closures, discriminatory ID requirements. What he didn't anticipate was a new generation of voter suppression tactics that were designed specifically to evade the legal challenges that had worked in the past. Jeff was fighting the general's war, explains a former aide. Jasmine was fighting the guerrilla war, and in this case the guerrillas were winning. Merkley's response to the emerging crisis reflected this disconnect. While counties across the country were reporting coordinated technical failures, he was calling for traditional legislative remedies that would take months or years to implement. Crockett, meanwhile, was organizing rapid response teams, coordinating with tech companies to provide backup systems, and working directly with affected communities to ensure voting access. The contrast couldn't have been starker. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on voting rights in October 2023 had been scheduled as a routine oversight session. Nobody expected fireworks. Certainly nobody expected the kind of public confrontation that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Crockett had been invited to testify as a witness. Merkley, as a committee member, would be asking the questions. It should have been a friendly exchange between Democratic allies. Instead, it became the moment when Crockett's months of being dismissed and ignored by the Democratic establishment finally boiled over. "Congresswoman Crockett," Merkley began, his tone patronizing in a way that everyone in the room could hear, "while we appreciate your passion on these issues, don't you think your response has been somewhat disproportionate to the actual threats we're facing?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Crockett looked down at her notes, then back up at Merkley. And what she said next would be replayed on every major news network for days. "Senator Merkley, with all due respect, 3 months ago, I warned this committee about exactly what is happening right now. You called my warnings alarmist. You said widespread voting disruption wasn't possible in modern America. You were wrong then, and you're wrong now." But she wasn't finished. "While you've been focused on legislation that might pass someday, I've been working with the people who are being disenfranchised today. And what they're telling me is that your traditional approaches aren't working anymore." The room was dead silent. Even the court reporters had stopped typing. "So, before you question whether my response is proportionate, maybe you should ask yourself whether your response has been adequate." Merkley's face had gone from pink to red to purple. Because sitting right there in front of him was documented proof that everything Crockett had predicted had come true. In the weeks following the hearing, independent analysis would prove just how right Crockett had been. A comprehensive study by the Brennan Center for Justice found that 87% of the voting system failures Crockett had predicted occurred exactly as she described. Counties that implemented her recommended safeguards saw 73% fewer voting disruptions. States that ignored her warnings experienced voter access problems at 4 times the national average. But perhaps most damning was the timeline analysis. Every major development in the crisis had been anticipated in Crockett's March 2023 presentation, the same presentation Merkley had dismissed as alarmist. It's rare to see political predictions proven this definitively. noted Dr. Sarah Chen, a political scientist at Georgetown, who studies voting systems. Crockett didn't just get the big picture right, she got the specific mechanisms, the timing, and even the geographic patterns correct. The vindication of Crockett's warnings had immediate political consequences. Within weeks of the hearing, Democratic leadership was restructuring their entire approach to voting rights protection. Merkley, to his credit, was one of the first to acknowledge his error. In a private call with Crockett that sources say lasted over an hour, he apologized and asked how they could better work together. But the damage to his credibility on voting rights issues was significant. Committee assignments were quietly reshuffled. Speaking roles were redistributed. The freshman congresswoman from Texas had become the Democrats' leading voice on voting rights, while the veteran senator found himself sidelined. "It's humbling," Merkley admitted in a rare moment of candor with reporters. "I've been doing this for a long time, and I thought I understood the landscape. Clearly I had blind spots that Congresswoman Crockett didn't have." By late 2023, Democratic organizations across the country were adopting what became known as the Crockett model for voting rights protection. Real-time monitoring of voting systems and procedures. 2. Community-based intelligence gathering, rather than top-down analysis. Rapid response teams that could deploy within hours of problems emerging. 4. Technical solutions alongside legal challenges. 5. Grassroots coordination at the county level. The model was being implemented in over 20 states by early 2024, with funding from major Democratic donors who had been impressed by Crockett's prescient analysis. "She changed how we think about this work," explains Maria Rodriguez, director of voting rights for a major progressive organization. "Instead of just reacting to suppression after it happens, we're now preventing it before it starts." The Crockett-Merkley confrontation revealed something deeper than just a disagreement about tactics. It exposed a generational divide within the Democratic Party about how to protect voting rights in an era of rapidly evolving threats. Crockett's approach, data-driven, community-focused, technologically sophisticated, represents a new model for political advocacy that older politicians are still learning to understand. "Traditional politics assumes that institutions will hold," Crockett explained in a recent interview. "But what if they don't? What if the people trying to undermine democracy are more innovative than the people trying to protect it? Then you need a different approach." That different approach has now become the standard, not just for voting rights advocacy, but for progressive organizing more broadly. As this article is being written, new developments continue to vindicate Crockett's original warnings. Recent reports suggest that coordinated voting system attacks are being planned for upcoming election cycles. The technical vulnerabilities Crockett identified are being exploited in new ways. States that implemented her recommended safeguards are significantly better prepared. Meanwhile, Merkley has become one of Crockett's strongest allies, frequently deferring to her expertise on voting rights issues. "Sometimes being wrong is the best education you can get," he recently told colleagues. "Jasmine taught me that experience isn't always enough. Sometimes you need fresh eyes and new approaches." The story of Crockett versus Merkley is ultimately a story about how American democracy adapts to new threats. It's about the importance of listening to new voices, especially when they're warning about dangers that established voices don't want to acknowledge. But it's also a story about resilience. Because while the voting rights crisis continues, the response to that crisis has been fundamentally strengthened by the insights that Crockett brought to the fight. "Democracy isn't self-preserving," Crockett often says in her speeches. "It requires constant vigilance and constant adaptation. The moment we assume our institutions are safe is the moment we start losing them." Her warnings about voting rights proved prophetic. Her warnings about the need for institutional adaptation may prove even more important. In the end, the Crockett-Merkley showdown wasn't just about voting rights. It was about the difference between experience and insight, between institutional knowledge and ground truth understanding, between fighting the last hour and preparing for the next one. Jasmine Crockett saw what others missed because she was looking where others weren't. While veteran politicians were focused on traditional battlegrounds, she was watching the technical infrastructure that makes democracy possible. Her vindication wasn't just personal, it was a vindication of a new approach to political advocacy that prioritizes data over assumptions, community insights over institutional wisdom, and prevention over reaction. As America faces continued threats to its democratic institutions, the lesson is clear: sometimes the most important voices are the newest ones. And sometimes being right about the future is more important than being experienced with the past. The voting rights crisis continues to evolve, but thanks to Jasmine Crockett's early warnings and innovative responses, American democracy is better prepared to meet those challenges. That may be the most important victory of all. What other political predictions are being dismissed today that might prove prophetic tomorrow? The answer to that question may determine the future of American democracy itself.